So I received a request to show everybody how to create a card like this featuring someone's name. It's a very simple process, and we're going to go over some key functions in Shortcuts a lot that you can use to create this and many other things with the software. So the first thing we're going to do is grab our text tool over here on the left-hand side, or the type tool. So we simply click, and then simply click anywhere onto the mat here. And you'll see that we have a blinking cursor that indicates that we're ready to type something. And I'm going to use the word Nancy, or the name Nancy. Now, for this demonstration, I'm not overly concerned about the size of the card. That's something that we can adjust afterwards, since we are working with SVGs. We can always adjust that later on. For the sake of this demonstration, I'm just going to make things as large as I can, just so that they're easier to see. So now that I have my name on the mat, I clicked on my main selection tool right here up at the top. And if you click anywhere onto the actual name, you'll be presented with a number of different handles. This handle here on the bottom right, this is like your resizing handle. Now if I take and grab and drag this, you'll notice that I can make this as big and wide or small as I'd like. Now, one of my biggest pet peeves when I see designs and they're kind of like this, where the font is taken out of proportion, I'm not a big fan of that. So what you can do to drag this and make it larger while keeping your font in proportion, right now I'm just holding and dragging it. Now I'm going to click on my Shift key. I'm going to click and hold it, and you'll see what happens here. You see how it kind of snapped into proportion? Now when I drag and resize this, no matter how big or small I make it, it will stay in proportion as long as I continue holding that Shift key. Now watch what happens when I release it. Okay, that's with it released. Now I'm holding it down. Okay, so if you want to hold down your Shift key while you drag something, it will keep it in proportion. So I'm going to make it pretty big, again, just for the sake of this demonstration. And I can go ahead and release. And there is my full-size Nancy. Now for this card, I do want the font to be a little bit thicker. I've not personally experimented with round fonts or script fonts. I probably would stay away from those, as they may be too thin. So what we can do to more easily and visually select an alternative font is just make sure that we have this selected. And by selected, I mean you can see all of the handles, and there's a little box around it. We're going to go under Text and click on Font Preview. Okay, that's going to bring up this window. And I'm going to shrink this down a little bit so I can see more than just one huge font. And I'll make this a little bit longer. And I can literally just scroll through all of my system fonts here and find one that I think is suitable. Now in this case, this is a nice bold font here. I'm going to scroll down just a little bit more and see if there's anything else. Here we have the standard Arial Black. I like that. Okay, so I'm going to click on this. And then on the bottom right, I'm going to click Change Font. And just magically like that, it changes it to that font that I selected. Okay, so that's step one, is getting your name, typing it out. And again, I'm not overly concerned about the size right now. I'm just going to keep it visually large. Okay, now one thing that I want to do is create a card base that has nice rounded edges on the bottom, or corners I should say. So what we're going to do is click and hold the Draw a Shape button here on the left-hand side, and we're going to select the rounded rectangle option right here. Okay, now we can literally just click and drag to create a rounded rectangle. Again, not worried about the size. You can make it as big or as large as you want later. Okay, so I'm just going to make it about this big. And there is my rounded rectangle. Now, we could technically take this and weld it to this shape. But what I want to do is I want to get rid of the rounded part of this rectangle up at the top only. Okay, I'm going to move Nancy out of the way here. And I've got my rounded rectangle here. Now what I'm going to do is create just a basic rectangle. So again, I'm going to go over here to where you see draw a shape. I'm going to click and hold, and I'm going to select just the regular rectangle option. Okay, now what you want to do is you want to click and drag to create a rectangle that is wider than your rounded rectangle, and then also make it long enough to where we can take it and overlap it with the rounded rectangle, and so that it's long enough to go past the rounded section here. So you can see based on the grid that's on our mat that this rounded section is maybe a ½ inch or so. So we have plenty of surface area on our rectangle here. You can see if we line it up with that one, it's just over 2 inches. Just to make this easier visually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the color of this rectangle, and I can accomplish that by clicking and selecting it. And then over here on the right hand side, I'm going to click on my little palette, and I'm going to click on the little square that is the same color as my rectangle next to the fill option. I'm going to click that, and then I'm just going to change it to red. It doesn't matter what color. I just want to help you differentiate between the two shapes. Okay, so there it is. It's red. And now what we're going to do is we're going to take this and drag it on top of the rounded rectangle, and I'm going to bring it down just beyond the point where that curve on the corners ends. Okay, right about there. Now, if you notice, if I take and point to, I'm not clicking or doing anything, and just point to this shape, the rest of its outline will be revealed, regardless of what's there. Okay, so even though we have that red rectangle there, if I highlight it, it'll show me the rest of the stroke or the actual shape. So I think that looks good. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my mouse. Again, I just have the regular selection tool selected. I'm going to click and drag a box around these two elements, and that selects both of them at the same time. Now I'm going to go up to Path, and I'm going to click Back minus Front. Okay, and you can see what happened there. It took whatever part of that red rectangle that was on top of our rounded rectangle, and it just chopped it off. So that leaves us with a nice shape here, and this is all one piece. We can take a look at the preview. You can see that it's just one solid piece with a nice flat surface for Nancy to sit on. Okay, so now what I want to do is I want to make the name wide enough to fit the entire width of this. So there's two ways to accomplish that. We can either resize the name or we can resize the shape. I'm going to resize the name, so I'm going to click on it. I'm going to grab this handle, and I'm going to resize it. Now you'll notice again, unless you hold down Shift, which I'm going to click right now, it's going to skew all weird. So I'm going to hold down Shift while I resize just to make sure that everything stays in proportion as far as the font is concerned. Now, one other thing you'll notice too, as I'm dragging this to the right and making it larger, I'll get to a point where it kind of clicks and snaps into a position. And there's a little blue line there that is basically lining up the far right part of the Y and the right of the rounded rectangle. So it's kind of helping us size this appropriately without really having to do any math or any guessing. Okay, so once it snaps there, I'm going to go ahead and release, and there we have it. Okay, now you'll also notice if you click and drag it or just move it around, the left side also does the same thing. The right side now has a blue line, the left side has a blue line, and there's a nice blue line in the center. So that tells us that not only is this lined up with the left and right, but it's also centered. Okay, now that feature is pretty accurate. We're going to check our work here in a second just to make sure that it is, and if it isn't, we'll make some slight adjustments. Now let me show you one other thing here that I failed to mention. I'm going to click and select the rounded rectangle option, and I'm going to draw another one. Doesn't matter how big right now. This is just for demonstration. Once we have it on there, you'll notice that up here in the top left, there's an option for corner radius. Now if you increase or decrease that, it will kind of determine how rounded those corners are. So that's an option for you. If you want to change that value, you're more than welcome to do that. Initially, I don't know what the default is. Mine came out nice and rounded. Yours may not be as rounded, and you may want to add more roundness. That's up to you. Okay, so now what we're going to do is we're going to take the name and this shape and make them all one piece. Because right now, if we click the preview button, they are not bonded in any way. They are two separate elements completely. All right, so what I'm going to do with my selection tool, I'm going to click on Nancy. I'm just going to drag it down and get it pretty much as close as I can. Now, right now, because of this font and how it's designed, the C is technically making contact, but the rest of the letters are not. Okay, so I got it close. I'm going to select it over here just by clicking on it. And then on the right-hand side, if you click on this little arrow tool, you'll be presented with this nudge section. And what this does is it allows you to move things in very small increments. So I'm going to click the nudge down, and I'm going to keep clicking it until I'm sure that this is nice and overlapped completely. Okay, and it looks like it is. Let's preview it. Looks pretty good to me. And one thing that I'm noticing here is that the left part of my N maybe isn't really completely lined up here. Let's take a look. I'm just zooming in. And yeah, you know, it's a little bit off. So I'm going to click on Nancy, and I'm going to go back to this little arrow. I'm going to nudge this down a little bit more, and then I'm also going to nudge it to the right. Okay, so I just nudged it to the right, and that looks a lot better to me. I don't think anyone else is really going to notice if it's just a tad bit off. That looks good. Okay, so I'm going to zoom out, and now here we have the shape and the name. They're overlapping each other just enough to where if I take and draw a box around both elements with my selection tool and click on Path up at the top and select Union, it takes and unites those two pieces. So now if we preview this, you'll notice that it's all one shape. This is all together, all one shape. Okay, so now we can move this around. We can resize this however we want, and it will all stay as one shape. Great. So there's half of our card. Now, before we take this and create the other half of the card, what I want to do is create a inset for this. Okay, so what we can do, and let me save my work here. I do recommend that occasionally you save your work just in case something happens, or if you want to go back, and I'll just call it Nancy, save, and there we go. So to create an inset for this, you want to go ahead and highlight it, and you're going to go under Effects, and we're going to select Shadow Layer, and it says Contour Cut in parentheses. So let's select that. So you'll be presented with this box, and in this box there's an option called Inset Shadow. Let's go ahead and click on that, and you can see what that did. You can see the original design in the background there, and then here is our nice inset. It automatically creates a nice inset based on what's selected, and we can increase or decrease the size of that inset. Okay, and this is going to be completely up to you how much or how little you want. I do like to kind of keep a nice little border around the design. Okay, so that looks pretty good to me. And we also have the option to change it from shadow to shadow rounded. So it kind of cleans up these little corners here. And we can do shadow straight. And I think by default, shadow straight and shadow, I kind of like the shadow a little bit better. Okay, so after playing around with the settings, I like this setup. And I'm going to leave it as is, and I'm going to hit OK. And now what you'll notice is that it literally created that for me. And now I've got two layers. One, that's the inset. I'll probably cut this out of a pattern paper, or I could do a solid on this one. Doesn't matter. And I can move that off to the side. And actually, before we do that, right now, this fits this piece perfectly. So I'm going to select both of these, and I'm going to resize them together just to make sure that everything stays in proportion. Okay, I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, and I'll move that out of the way. Okay, so right now, this card is going to be, if we put it up to the top left of our grid, we'll notice that it's about 6.25 inches wide and 4 inches tall. Okay, so if you want, I'm going to put this on top of this piece here, select them both, and just resize it to about 4 by 6. That's a pretty standard size, I think. Okay, so this is our little inset piece. I'm going to move this off to the side so I don't mess with it. This is what I'll call the card base. Okay, now what we want to do is take this and copy it. So you can right click and hit copy. And I'm going to bring this down, and I'm going to right click and paste. Okay, so it literally took and duplicated this piece. Now what you want to do is right click, and we're going to transform, and we're going to flip this vertically. Okay, literally just kind of flipped it upside down. And now we can take and join these two sections together, and this is basically where it's going to fold to create your little card. So let me zoom in a little bit so I can really see what I'm looking at here. Okay, I'm going to select this piece, and on the right hand side with my position and size option selected, I'm going to nudge this down until both of these pieces are overlapping, because we're going to bond these together. We're going to unite them or union them so that it's all one piece. Okay, let me do that. Let me nudge this down, and it doesn't look like they're overlapping. I still see a little bit of white there. I'm going to go ahead and click on this again, and let's see. No, still a little bit of white there, I think. Bring that down, and that looks good. Let me zoom out. Okay, now I can take, with my selection tool still selected here, I'm going to take and draw a box around both of these elements. And I'm going to go to Path and hit Union. Okay, now let's take a look at the preview. Move this out of the way, and you can see this is all one solid piece. Okay, and literally, that's pretty much it. You've got your card base, and again, you've got this piece that you can put right on the front. You could technically make another one of these to put on the back. I don't think that's necessary though, since no one's really going to be looking at the back of the card. But this is a nice overlay for the front. And we've got our two main pieces for the card. That's really it. Now, one thing that you can do, once you cut this out, if you have a score tool, obviously you want to score this right down the center here. Okay? Or if you'd like, if you want to keep going with this tutorial, I'll show you how to make your own score lines. Okay, so what you want to do is you want to select the pen tool here, or the draw tool. I'm going to use that, and I'm going to click on the mat over here on the left of our shape. I'm going to click, and when you click once, as long as you don't do anything else, it's going to start creating a line. And I'm going to take and I'm going to hold down Shift. Now you'll notice that I can make this line go anywhere. And I'm not 100% sure if it's straight. But if you hold Shift, it will actually create lines at 0, 45, 90, and so on degrees. Okay, so I'm holding down Shift. It's keeping it nice and straight. I'm going to bring it out all the way over here to the other side so that this line is wide enough to span the entire width of the card. And I'm going to click to create my second point. Now technically, because I clicked, it's going to want to create another line. But if you hit Escape, it will finish that line with just those 2 points. So we've got a nice line here that we can pretty much do anything with. And you guessed it, I'm going to take it, and it looks like it's snapping right into the center pretty seamlessly for us. Okay. Now before we do that, obviously if we put a straight line there, it's just going to chop this in half. So we can actually change this to a dashed line. And we'll accomplish that by making sure that it's selected. So of course it's selected here because you can see the handles. So with the line selected, we're going to go over to this little palette, the fill and stroke options. And you'll see here there's an option and a little drop down for line style. Okay, and you can see that one of the line styles is a set of perforated lines. So let's go ahead and click on that. And it's kind of hard to see since I'm a little zoomed out here, but if I zoom in, you'll notice, if I deselect it, that we have a nice perforated line. Okay, so what I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom out. I'm going to take this and pop it right here, and you can see it's snapping right in there because it knows that that's the center of this shape. And I'm just going to move it and drop it right on there. I literally just clicked, dragged, and moved it right onto this shape, right on top of it. Just for the sake of being able to see the difference, I'm going to select this and go over to my fill and stroke and click on this little box here. I'm going to make this black just so that we can see it better. Okay, and that didn't work. Let me change the stroke to black. There we go. Okay, so now you can see the score line on top of the actual card. Let me zoom out so you can see it. There you go. Now, you could technically leave it like this. It's not going to hurt anything. But what I want to do is I'm going to get rid of some of these score marks because this score mark going all the way over here, it may technically cut through this, and I don't want to do that. So what we want to do is we want to select the score mark here, and you're going to go up to Path. You want to make sure it's selected. Go to Path and select Object to Path, because right now this is technically an object. And what I mean by that is if we resize this, it's going to start adding more score marks. It's kind of like a live object where it will automatically update itself based on the width, the height, the size. We don't want that. We want this to be kind of flattened and taken out of this live update mode. So what we're going to do, again, with it selected, we're going to go to Path and we're going to click Object to Path. Okay, and that kind of takes it and flattens it so that it is more easily editable, if that makes sense. Okay, and I'll show you what we're going to do next here in a second. Okay, now I'm going to grab my eraser tool, and it's over here on the left, and it's square. You can increase or decrease the size by clicking this little option here. You can also make it round if you want. I'm going to keep mine square, and I'm going to make mine a little bit smaller. And I'm going to start erasing some of these score marks. Now, I'm going to make a mistake here on purpose. I want to get rid of this score mark. Okay, so I did, but I also got rid of part of the Y. We're going to undo that. Okay, so the way to erase the score mark without erasing anything else is accomplished by locking that layer. So you'll notice here under layers, there's a little button there that you can click on to turn on or off the lock. And when you turn on a lock on a layer, and again, this is the actual card, and you can confirm that by turning on or off the little eyeball there. That will either show or hide the layer. Okay, so I locked this, and now I still have my eraser tool selected. And you'll notice if I go over here and now click on this score mark, it only erases the score mark. Obviously, we don't need these. We don't need these. We definitely don't need these. And this score mark, because of its position, it looks like it's going to kind of create a slit there. We don't want that. I'm just going to get rid of this thing completely. I'm going to get rid of that one. And I can get rid of half of this one. And maybe half of that one. Let's get rid of this. And that one. And I can get rid of most of that one. Get rid of that. And get rid of that. Okay, so now we've got a nice score mark there. And I think this one here could use a little love too. I'm going to cut this one off a little bit and just leave it like that. That's fine with me. Now, one other thing that I'm noticing here is when we took the letter Y's and we kind of joined them together, we have this little stray little piece here. I'm not a big fan of that either. For now, we can unlock the card. Okay, so now when we unlock the card, any modifications or anything that we do will apply to the actual card base. So I'm going back here with my eraser. Okay, so I'm going to just go over here and I'm going to zoom in some more just so I can get really accurate with this. And I'm just going to click and get rid of that. There we go. Okay, so now we're pretty much done. Let me go over here on the bottom left. I'm going to click Fit to Window. This is the little zoom option where you can zoom in or out based on some predefined numbers. I'm going to go up to, let's just go to 100%. Okay, there we go. Now let's take a look at the preview. And we've got the main card. And now we have some nice score marks as well. And let me take a look and see here. So in the Layers section, you'll see that if I turn this on or off, those are my score marks. This layer here is my actual card base. And then this layer here is the overlay that's going to go right on there. Okay, so what we can do, since we want to keep the score marks attached and grouped with the actual card, if we take and draw a box around the actual card itself and the score marks to select them both at the same time, we can then right-click and group them together. Okay, so what that did in the Layers section was it took the card and the score marks and put them in a folder or created a group so that no matter where I click, it will move everything together, including the score marks. And then, of course, this is a separate layer and a separate group. And that is our nice little overlay. And that's kind of snapping into place right now. I can nudge it just a little bit. And we'll do a preview, and you can see how nice that's going to work out. I need to nudge this down a little bit. It's not perfectly centered, but once everything's cut out, everything will be ready to go. So if you want to go ahead and cut this out now, let's say you have a Cricut or a Brother Scan and Cut. I'm going to actually, let me zoom out. I'm going to put my little overlay up here, and I'll put my card base over here. And that looks good. So I can go to File, Export, and I'm going to call this Nancy's Card Final. I like to call things final if I know that they are final, and hit Save. And for our Cricut users, there's an option here that you want to make sure you have checked, and that option is Design Space Compatible. So make sure that's checked and hit OK. And what that's going to do is it's going to save that SVG file to your desktop. Now, if you have a Brother Scan and Cut, and let's say you want to save these files individually, you can do that. And you can accomplish that in a number of ways. One way would be to take this and hide this. And just go to File, Export, and you can save it as an SVG file, or for those with scan and cuts, you can select .fcm as well. Whatever format works for you, you can go ahead and select. And we'll call this Nancy Card 1 and hit Save. And now I'm going to go back to Layers. I'm going to show the card base, but I'm going to hide the overlay. And I'm going to go to File, Export, and I'll call that Nancy Card 2 and hit Save. Okay, they're still here. They're both still here. But one was just hidden because we hid it using this little icon here. Now in this tutorial, I'm going to show Design Space, but on the Dreaming Tree site, we do have videos that show you how to import SVG files into Brother Canvas as well. Okay, so I'm going to click New Project, and I'm going to click Upload. I'm going to select Upload Image, Browse, and then on my desktop, I'm going to find the Nancy's Card Final.svg. There it is. hit save, and I can select and insert. Okay. And let me zoom out here. Now, for some reason, it took and grouped everything together. I'm going to ungroup it. And now I've got my card base, and I've got my overlay. Now let me arrange this and move it to the front so that you can see how nicely that's going to fit on there. Okay, and literally, if you have a Cricut, you do want to make sure that for this piece that has the score marks, that we attach this together, and then you can click Make It. It'll lay this out for you on your mat, and you are ready to cut. So, hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please take a moment and head over to the Dreaming Tree YouTube page and subscribe. And while you're there, make sure you hit that little bell so that you get notifications anytime we release one of our helpful shortcuts lot videos or any of our freebie SVG files and our paid files for that matter as well. So thanks again for joining me, and I look forward to crafting with you next time.